Hey everyone, today we have a GE Frontload washing machine that will not turn on and operate at all. We try to press the buttons to turn it on and it will not respond. So I want to show you how to go through and diagnose a machine like this that is not going to operate at all. I can even hear in the background why it's not working, so I want to show you how to do this. And for reference, the model that we have here is a GFW 550, although this fix will work for anything that is the GFW 510 through the PFW 950. Quick way to know is if you look at the inside of the door, it has that blue gasket and fan up top. Generally, that's the current model of GE Frontload unit. So let's get into it and see what's wrong and get this up and running.
The tools that you want to have for this is a Phillips head screwdriver and then a multimeter. And for that multimeter, I do suggest very thin leads to tap and test the control board if you want to find some of the root culprits of these difficult fixes that we're going to do. In addition, you would want a 14mm socket wrench and then a door boot spring tool. And then finally, a pair of needle nose pliers or slip-jawed wrench if you have to get underneath to do some fixes to the drain pump. Now for your unit, there could be a few situations where it's not able to start. In the example of this unit, after a few seconds, the interface simply goes dead, preventing us from using the unit. And additionally, we can't even pull the unit's diagnostic codes because after a few seconds, the system just dies. So we can't pull any information from the unit. There are some other possible situations that you could have with your unit just simply being unresponsive or other particular situations where it will not respond to any commands on the dial. The first key, though, to this machine to diagnose it is listen. Can you hear any noise from the unit? In the case of many of these GE Frontload machines, you could hear a relay switching behind the unit. Now, if you hear this relay clicking, it can help assist the diagnostics, as crazy as that sounds. Count the number of seconds between the relay clicking. If the relay clicks every 10 seconds, it could be a main board and then possibly inverter motor board. If the relay clicks every 6 seconds, it's potentially either the main board or the user interface. These are typical culprits based on the main relay failing to communicate with either the UI, the inverter assembly, or another component on the system. There are also a few other culprits as well, so we're going to get into and diagnose everything one by one to rule everything out. To start to disassemble the washing machine for inspection, you need to remove the dispenser box. Pull it out as far as it will go, then press the tab on the left side of the box and pull the box fully out. Locate the next 5 screws in the soap dispenser housing. 3 are on the left, 2 are on the right. Use your Phillips head screwdriver to remove them, and I suggest to make sure it has a good magnetic pull on it. Make sure to note the location and orientation of the screws. Some are fine thread and others are coarse. Once you have that done, lift up on the left side of the interface about 15 degrees. Then pull it forward to unlatch it from the bulkhead. There are then 3 screws behind this interface at the top of the lid. Use a screwdriver to remove those 3 from the washing machine. And when you have those 3 removed, you can pull the top towards you and then off away from the washer, revealing the very top of the unit. At this point, you can easily see the main control board on the system. From this view, as a note, you could have the machine plugged in for further diagnosis and testing the board if you want to, although I would suggest having it temporarily unplugged for inspections. To either remove the board to replace it or allow easy access for testing and viewing, there are 2 metal screws that are on the cover of this control board. Once you have these 2 screws removed, this top metal panel can be slid towards the front of the washing machine and then removed. Once you get underneath, then there are 1 or 2 more screws that hold the plastic control housing in place. Once you have these removed, the control board can also be pushed forward towards the front of the washing machine to remove it from its secure location. You'll then want to undo any clips or ties that secure the board to this. There are 2 or 3 cable ties that hold the wire trunks in place as well as those clips, and also you have the pressure switch hose. Take a picture of the harness if you need to for orientation, but I think every wire on this can only be inserted one way. You may have to unplug the pressure hose to maneuver the board around. You can inspect or test the board a bit more easily depending on what you want to do. Next, I'm going to take a multimeter with these very thin leads and inspect the wire harness that sends voltage to the inverter board because we had that relay click every 10 seconds. You need to set this to AC voltage, and with the very thin leads on the black and white wires, you can see what the board is doing. It's only sending 3.6 volts to the inverter motor. When you hear the relay click, the voltage drops to 0 and the board resets itself. This suggests we've already found the culprit on this board. that the system isn't sending the right voltage, something's bad on the inside of the board, and it's very common these boards suck. Next, again, if you didn't see the green lights on the board at all or hear a click even at all, you can use a multimeter and test the black and white wires on the right side of the board for voltage. This is where you'd find input voltage to the board. You should get 120 volts AC. If the board's dead and you get 120 volts here, then the board is the culprit of the washing machine not working and it needs replaced. Note that GE itself suggests if you hear the 10-second click, it's a bad inverter. So if you tested this and get 120 volts AC from the inverter pins, then the inverter is bad. And there are a few secret reasons this board could have failed other than the inverter, although that was the case in my video. So slowly work your way around the board, remove all the wires, and again, they only remove and reinstall one way. There are 6 retainer tabs around the board, and you'll slowly and gently need to pry them apart from the top of the housing. A replacement board for this machine is just that, the board, so the plastic housing will need removed. Next, to swap the board out, you want to remove the 3 screws that hold the board in place on the plastic housing. Once you have those out, you can pull the board. But before you replace the board, the super critical thing that you need to look at is the triac that is located here near the maroon wire harness or any components that are near it. Many times when these boards go bad, you will find burn or explosive damage on it, and that suggests that the drain pump on your washing machine went bad due to an obstruction and destroyed the pump as well as the board. If you replace the board and the pump was the culprit that blew that triac, it will destroy the very next board you install and you'll be down 2 boards, not 1. So I want to show you how to check, test, and replace the pump in a little bit. There are 2 kinds of boards in the machines. You have the board for the GFW 510, 550, and 555 series that uses one style of board, and then there is a different part number for the board for the GFW 650, 850, and the PFW 950 and I think 970 series. There are only 2 major styles of boards for this machine as of 2024, and they look very similar. Use a screwdriver and reinstall the 3 screws to the board and cover, and then you can begin to reinstall the wires to your machine. They only go in one way, but if you had the photo from your phone, that could help. There are many plastic hooks to secure the trunks in place, and you may need new cable ties to route the wires, and they are not included from this box from what I see with GE. If you're satisfied with putting the new board in, slowly work the board back into place where the housing was. You have the 2 pegs on the right side of the plastic housing that slot into the rear of the washing machine. Once that's all slotted in, make sure the pressure hose is installed and all the wires are routed to the various places that hold them on the washer, and now you're able to program the new board. When you plug the machine in for the first time, this is what you're going to see. The lights will flash and the machine looks like it's in diagnostics. The board comes with this card that will let you text GE on how to program the washing machine with the right programming code. And that will vary between the 2 styles of boards and then the model number on your machine. You can either follow along with your cell phone and the card that GE gives you, but here's what they're going to tell you. Press the start button on the washing machine and then a single number is going to be displayed on the screen. By pressing the start button again, it will cycle through the various numbers of programming codes on the washing machine. And here is the GE cheat sheet for that. Once you have the correct number displayed on the interface, press and hold the pause/start button approximately for 5 seconds. The relay will click and the light will turn off, rebooting the unit into the correct programming code, and your machine should be ready to work. Now, let's say you put the wrong programming code in. You can use the diagnostic system in the video that I have to reprogram the personality code, and I'll have a link to that video at the end of this one so you know how to do that if in case you made a mistake. But let's say that the board either did not fix the issue or you think something else is causing the machine relay to fire, turning the system off, or it's not working still. There's a few other issues that could cause the machine not to work. You can use your multimeter to test various components on the board if you want to, like the UI system, the drain pump, or any other electromechanical system, and I'll show you how to do that real quickly. With the unit unplugged, for example, you can test the drain pump by setting the multimeter to ohms resistance. You can then use your leads to press down into the black connector and brown connector beside it, pin 2 and 3, on the maroon wire harness that I mentioned earlier. This could test your drain pump motor windings, and you should get about 20 ohms of resistance as the pump is good. If it's plus or minus 10 or 20% above or below that, then the motor may be going bad, causing your issue. These are the names of all the wire harnesses on the GE front load washer. By knowing where these are and what they are, you could use your multimeter to test various components to figure out which one could be causing an issue. This is what each of the harnesses do, and I'm going to include a link to the service manual for this machine in the description. By reading the schematics, you could test and find out if there's a bad wire to the damper or the user interface. Remember that this washer should be off to test resistance. It would need to be plugged in to test AC or DC voltage, whichever highway to hell you're currently dealing with. But these tests are some pretty advanced things you can do, and I'll have some more ideas later on. But again, the two most frequent causes of this machine going bad, other than the board, are the inverter or the drain pump. In rare cases, it could be a wiring harness that is open and exposed that is causing the issue. So let's go ahead and show you how to access all those things in order. Firstly, I'm loosening up two surface mount cable ties from the bulkhead that hold the UI in place so I can move it up and out of the way just a little bit. That's optional. Open the door of the washing machine and take a Phillips head screwdriver or a drill gun and remove the two screws on the right side where the door lock are. Then remove the faceplate of the door lock assembly. Then remove the two screws that hold the door lock in place. Remove the door boot seal wire. You can use a thin bladed screwdriver to gently pry it away from the door gasket. Roll the door gasket around and away from the bulkhead. This will allow you to access the damper system and the door lock. Although I forgot to film it, the next stage would be to remove the flap of the drain pump cover. There are 3 screws at the bottom of the washing machine, so you need to either tilt the machine backwards against a wall or put a small piece of wood underneath that will let you tilt the machine slightly to access these screws. On the bottom, you need to use a drill gun or screwdriver and remove the 3 screws from the bottom of the machine, and if you tilted the machine against a wall or with wood, go ahead and seat it back on the floor. Next, there are 9 screws on the top of the machine, 2 that are facing forward on the very corners of the unit, and then 7 pointing downward on the bulkhead. The 3 middle ones deal with the damper fan, so when you have those removed, you can slide the fan to the rear and uncouple it from the bulkhead using the inside where we had removed the gasket. You can then lift up and forward on the bulkhead to begin the removal process. As a note, that door harness can often have a bent, broken, or snapped wire that could have caused weird door lock issues that would possibly result in that main board failure, and you should inspect the wires on both the door lock on the right side and as well as the wires on the left side where you could swap the door orientation if needed. Once you have that door off, you have 2 options here on what you can inspect, the inverter motor and the drain pump. However, to do either, you may want to have more access to them, and that requires you to use a 14mm socket wrench to remove the 4 screws that hold the counterbalance weight at the bottom on. I would recommend you hold the concrete weight when you remove the last screw, as it could pop off, although the concrete rests on the pegs somewhat, so it isn't going to fall off magically. From here, you can replace the drain pump if you want. I have a dedicated video on how to do that, and I will link to it at the end of this video so we don't replicate the same video twice. I do carry the replacement drain pumps though at my store, and one key to note here is that if the drain pump is bad, you won't find any strong resistance on the plastic impeller motor when you spin it. You should feel 3 to 4 strong areas on the pump, and like we tested earlier on the multimeter, it should have 20 ohms of resistance. One thing that I haven't made a video on yet is the inverter board removal and replacement. This is a very common point of failure. There's 1 screw that holds it in place. It is a 1/4 inch hex or a Phillips head screw. Once you have that removed, you have to remove the press mount cable tie from underneath, then push the board housing rearward and then up to remove it from the housing. These boards require you to remove cable ties, the cover, and wire harness from underneath before you can actually remove the board to replace it. There are 6 small pieces that keep the cover on, so you need to use a small screwdriver or needle nose pliers to slowly rock the cover back and forth to remove it. This is not easily shown on camera, but is not very hard to do. Once the top cover is off, you can work to remove the 4 wire harnesses from the inverter board. You then slowly will want to work the wire trunks out of the assembly, and then once it's done, you can fully remove the inverter motor and the back of the board itself from the washing machine. The inverter has 2 small clips on the edges that need unhooked, and then there are 4 screws that hold the board into place. These all need removed before you can take the board out of the plastic housing, much like the main board. As of this video, there's only one kind of inverter board for essentially all the GE front-load washing machines of this style. Once you have it out of the packaging, it's just going to seat and house one way back into the unit based on how the screws are oriented. Put all the screws back into place with a screwdriver, and don't forget the 2 small retainer clips that will pop the housing back into place. One thing to remember though, if the board was possibly the culprit, is looking for any other damaged wires, which I kind of overlooked because I knew that the board was bad on this particular machine. Make sure to check any wires that are underneath, like the motor and inverter assembly wires, for any damage or breaks. You could also have issues with the door light or dampener system. It's very rare that these wires will break, but there are some few instances where a wire was grounding out somewhere, causing the board issues. If this was the case, the wire trunk would need either replaced or repaired. Usually the damage would be right around where the wire harness plugs in or where a cable tie is. In case you can't find an issue back to the inverter though, you need to seat the board back into the washer, install the 4 wire harnesses back into the board, then route the wires through any of the holders that the board has and put the cover on. This is hard to show perfectly on camera because of how tight and poorly lit the space is, but it's pretty straightforward on where the wires go. And there's no real wrong way to do this. Remember to check for wire breaks. When the wires are installed, slowly work the board cover back onto the inverter assembly, and when that's done, guide the inverter back onto the chassis and slide it into place. Reinstall that screw and the push mount cable tie back into place, and when all those steps are done, you should have that brand new working inverter in place, which is the cause of many issues on this style unit. For the final stages in reassembly and testing, given how these washers are, I would suggest the bare minimum installation to make sure it works. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the counterbalance weight, which is easier to do when the machine is tipped over slightly because there's not 40 pounds on the machine prior to the counterbalance being put back on. I'm going to reinstall the door wire on the left side and slowly work the front back onto the bulkhead. There are 4 plastic pegs that the front sits on for the bulkhead, and then the door latch on the right side needs seated into place. There's a small hook that it will rest on. With the door being able then to be shut and locked, we can plug the unit in to see if the system is fixed or not after replacing the inverter and or the drain pump. I did the inverter first, and it actually still shut down, which isolated the board as being the issue. One extremely advanced test you could do if you're really frustrated with this machine is to plug the unit in and simply pull wire harnesses off the board and see if the removal of any particular wire stops the board from resetting. I don't recommend doing this unless you're a tech, but if you're still having issues at this point, well, it's the only way you may be able to figure out which load is causing the issue with wiring or a part is causing the system to fail. Let's go ahead and finish reassembling the machine by installing the 3 screws to the bottom of the washing machine with it tilted slightly backwards. Make sure that the door lock is in place, and then install the 2 screws to the lock and then the 2 that are on the cover on top. I'm going to slowly go ahead and reseat the damper fan into the housing at the top of the bulkhead, then slowly work the gasket around the lip of the washing machine. This is a little tedious. If you need to, use some dish soap to coat the inner lip of the gasket. It can make this job a little bit easier. The door boot spring is next. These GE units have a much wider spring than other brands, so typical spring tools don't work. I have a video where I used cable ties and a wrench to solve this. I'm using a different tool here that actually works really, really well, and I will have a link to it in the description. Carefully place it back into the seam of the gasket like you see here. And if you haven't done it yet, install the 8 or 9 screws on the top of the unit. One goes into the left and then one into the right side of the corners of the washer. That much wider screw going into the far right side of the console. If you unhooked any of the surface mount cable ties, go ahead and plug them back in. The washer lid is next. It slots into place with the 4 plastic pieces that secure the lid in place. It will only slot one way. Then you have 3 screws that hold the lid into the console bulkhead. Finally, slot the console into place. On the right side, there are 2 very wide head screws that the console kind of pivots and snaps into from right to left, and if put in place properly, it just all snaps and fits together. You have to insert the 5 screws to the dispenser housing. I like to pull the blue dispenser towards the front of the unit when inserting the screws. It should go very snugly together, securing the console and dispenser to the bulkhead. Then reinsert the dispenser into place. Everything should now be done and fixed. I wish these machines weren't as nebulous on the fixes, and I try to go over everything that I could think of on the machine. Most issues are the main board and pump if there was a pump obstruction that made it get destroyed. Then the inverter as well. Past that, it's going to be a wire harness issue that can be difficult to trace, or some other part has failed causing the main board to be an issue. Make sure to watch my diagnostic video. That may be able to help you if you can get into that system and run some codes very quickly before it resets. I hope this video does help most people solve the issue, and I hope you have a great day.